A Complete Unknown is directed by James Mangold, written by Jay Cox and James Mangold based on the book Dylan Goes Electric by Elijah Wald, and stars Timothée Chalamet, Edward Norton, Elle Fanning, Monica Barbaro, and Boyd Holbrook. And it follows Bob Dylan through the 1960s as he goes from complete unknown to timeless superstar, and how he changed the course of American music in the process. This was a movie who my anticipation for was kind of up and down going into it. You know, I don't really love music biopics, but I'm a big fan of Chalamet. I've liked Mangold's last few movies, and the early word of mouth was good. So going in, I was pretty excited for this, but coming out, I ultimately ended up feeling pretty just whelmed and in the middle on this. Starting with the good, though, I think this movie's strongest element is the rendering of Bob Dylan as a character and just, like, the stuff around him. Timothée Chalamet is doing really great work here, some of the best work of his career. You know, he's doing a vocal transformation, he's singing all the songs. It's a very good performance and absolutely one of the strongest parts of the movie. And the writing for him and for Bob Dylan definitely helps that. You know, they do a good job of kind of creating the mystery and the myth of Bob Dylan and playing into that, not giving you too many answers for things, you know, spending time on his childhood or anything like that. The ensemble cast behind Chalamet is also really solid. Edward Norton, Elle Fanning, turning in solid performances. Monica Barbaro was definitely the standout for me of the supporting cast, and I also liked Boyd Holbrook and Scoot McNairy in smaller roles. There's also some very solid technical aspects and crafts here, mainly the cinematography, production design, and sound do a really good job of kind of putting you in the time and the place, and the musical sequences where you hear Bob Dylan's music are really great. You know, you could make an argument that these scenes are stronger just because of how good Dylan's music is, and I think it is doing a lot of work here, but Mangold definitely knows how to handle these scenes. He does a good job of giving the songs the time and space they should have, building up to them well, and all that. These musical sequences kind of lead into my issues with the movie, though. Even if they are great, it feels like the movie kind of relies on them a bit, you know, making the movie feel almost more like an exercise than an experience or a real story. You know, it's a big issue of the script as well. It's sort of like a series of scenes that are kind of compelling but don't quite get there and are close to getting there, and then there's a song, and then it kind of starts over, and they have to get compelling again, and there's a song, and it just kind of repeats over and over. And I think the script is kind of one of the bigger problem areas with this movie. You know, it's clear to me that Jay Cox and James Mangold were putting in a pretty conscious effort to deviate from the traditional musical biopic formula. You know, as said earlier, it hones in on a specific decade and period of Dylan's life, and it spends time with a wider tapestry of characters, attempting to make it feel like Dylan is entering an already established world instead of a world feeling like it only started existing when Dylan entered it, as a lot of music biopics can often feel like. This pursuit is successful in some moments, but ultimately didn't really make this feel any different to me. You know, there are obviously differences, like I said, but the feeling of the movie on a whole just isn't too different. And I think that's because of the screenplay, but Mangold's direction only feeds into this more. You know, they do a good job of avoiding some, but there are still some very notable, what I would call walk hard isms in this movie. I mean, the amount of times that Dylan will be singing and the camera slowly zooms in on another character as they are amazed by Dylan's genius is too many to count. For better and for worse, this movie is exactly what you think it'll be. There are so many moments where you go, oh, this is this scene, and the movie does exactly what you're expecting. But it either ends up on the bad side with those walk hardisms I was talking about, or it ends up on the good side where you have like an awesome scene where Bob Dylan and a blackout drunk Johnny Cash, played by Boyd Holbrook, have a dialogue exchange and say really cool stuff to each other, and you go, yes, this is a movie. But those moments being of a high quality is so few and far between in the movie, and I think that is because Mangold and Jay Cox are doing very middle-of-the-road work here, and that is sort of my main issue with this movie, is that leads to the movie feeling very You know, the phrase that entered my head immediately after seeing it was that it was as competent as it was unremarkable, meaning that none of the movie's elements are actually bad. everything is at least solid, some things are good, some things are great, but because of this sort of mediocrity coming from the top down, it, at least to me, leads to the entire piece feeling that way, and a lot of elements that should be standing out a lot more are almost kind of muted by the shortcomings of these higher up elements. And as a result of that, there's not really a lot of remarkability, there's nothing that really rises to true greatness, and the movie just left very little impression on me. You know, I wanted to come away really loving it, but at the end of the day, the movie's just sort of like, yeah, Bob Dylan was a big deal, and he still is. Isn't that cool? And maybe that's just the function of a music biopic, but that just didn't really work for me. It didn't really leave an impression on me. The movie hasn't been in my mind since seeing it, aside from doing this review. So I think it's really lacking in staying power, which is a big flaw of it. Overall, I think this movie is ultimately pretty middle of the road, even though it has a lot of great aspects. The performances, with Chalamet being the standout, the characterization of Bob Dylan, the songs, the production design, the sound, the cinematography are all very good, but you've got this just, I think, very average script from Jay Cox and James Mangold. Even if they render Dylan very well, all the things around him sort of just fall by the wayside a little bit and are far less interesting. They aren't really paid the time they need to, and that spreads to Mangold's directing as well, which, while it is very competent, it just doesn't really do anything to rise to greatness or really be memorable. And I wanted to come away from this movie with a lot more positive feelings. I did still, I think, like it. I think I do still fall on the positive side of this movie, but it left a lot to be desired in terms of just being so medium. I think a lot of people will like this a lot more than me. I think it's going to be a big crowd pleaser. It's going to be nominated for Oscars, and so because of that, I would still recommend you see this one. I think there's a good chance you might like it more than me. If you're allergic to music biopics, I might say steer clear of this one. But yeah, see A Complete Unknown if you think you'll like it. Thank you so much for watching. Goodbye!